I knew walking into that house was a mistake. But it was my son's birthday, and he wanted his grandfather to be there. So there we were, standing in the middle of a living room that used to feel like home but now smelled like old secrets and cheap cologne. Nothing had changed. Not the wallpaper, not the stiff beige couch, not the family portraits that only ever featured my father's version of who belonged. But I had changed, or maybe I was just seeing it all clearly now. Ethan, my son, didn't notice. He was practically glowing. 7 years old, sugar-fueled and sunshine-filled, clutching the little thank you cards he had made for everyone. He still believed in kindness. In fairness. In family. God, I wish I still did. He didn't remember the years of silence, the slammed doors, the night my father told me I was a stain on the family name for leaving my abusive husband. But I remembered. I remembered everything. Still, I forced a smile. Ethan. He was already halfway across the room, shouting, "Grandpa!" and launching himself into my father's arms like we hadn't been strangers for years. Douglas didn't even smile. Just nodded once and handed him a box, small, square, sloppily wrapped in the Sunday comics section. Not gift wrap. Newspaper. At least the funny pages. But still. I should have stopped him. I almost did. But Brenna, my sister, was watching. Arms crossed, wine glass already in hand, her smirk sharp as a razor. Something about the way she stared at me froze me in place. Like I was 7 again, waiting for someone to tell me what I'd done wrong this time. Ethan dropped to the floor, legs crossed, and tore into the paper with that eager, innocent grin that only little boys have. For one brief second, I let myself believe maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was the one carrying the bitterness. And then he opened the box. His small fingers paused. His brow furrowed. He reached in and pulled out a handful of coal. Actual coal. Black, dusty chunks that left smudges on his palms. The room went silent. Douglas didn't blink. Didn't laugh. He just said, stone cold, naughty kids get what they deserve. I felt something snap inside me. A crack that had been forming for years but finally gave way. Ethan looked up at me, his hands trembling, his voice just above a whisper. Did I do something bad, Mommy? My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. My little boy was looking at me like he had done something wrong. And then Brenna snorted. Actually snorted. She sipped her wine and said through a laugh, just like his mother. Useless. That was it. I stood up, fists clenched, vision blurry with fury. I was ready to grab Ethan and walk out. Birthday or not. But before I could move, Douglas held up a hand. Calm. Unshaken. It's okay, he said. I got you a gift too. I turned toward him, every part of me screaming to run. But he held out a plain white envelope. There's something inside I think you should see, he said. Found it in your mother's attic. Figured it was time. I didn't want it. I didn't want anything from him. But something about his voice, almost smug, but hollow, made me take it. Inside was a photo. Old. Faded. Just one photograph. But when I looked at it, the whole room gasped. I don't talk about my past much. Most people who meet me now probably think I'm just a quiet single mom working 2 jobs and always smiling. Maybe that's who I am now. But that's not where I came from. And until that moment, I had never dared let anyone see how deep the damage ran. After my divorce, I had no place to go. My mother had passed away a year earlier, and the house I grew up in had been sitting empty, gathering dust and ghosts. So I went back. Me and Ethan. A toddler in a duffel bag. I told myself it was temporary. Just until I could get back on my feet. But the house pulled me back in, not because of comfort, but because it was all I had left. My mother, Ruth, was the only softness that house ever knew. She had this way of calming storms with a look. A quiet warmth that somehow made everything feel okay, even when it wasn't. Douglas, my father, was the storm. Former Navy. No nonsense. No excuses. No emotion. Unless you counted disappointment. I think the last time he hugged me was before I was old enough to remember it. He always wanted sons. Instead, he got me. And then 3 years later, Brenna, who became everything I wasn't. Loud. Competitive. Obedient. Pageant winning. Daddy's girl. I got pregnant young. Married a man I shouldn't have. Stayed too long. Left too late. When I showed up on Douglas's doorstep, bruised in places that didn't show, holding Ethan in my arms, he didn't even look at the baby. He just said, "You made your bed." Brenna showed up the next day with her signature fake sympathy and a bottle of wine. She looked at Ethan like he was something she stepped over on a sidewalk. "He's got his father's eyes," she said. That was the first, but not the last, time I wanted to slap her. I stayed just long enough to get by. Worked the early shift at a bakery. Pulled nights at a gas station. Put Ethan in daycare. Saved every dollar I could. When I finally had enough, I rented a tiny apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy. But it was ours. Still, I wanted Ethan to know family. Or at least believe in the idea of it. So every now and then, I let him visit Douglas. Short visits. Supervised. Controlled. To Ethan's credit, he loved his grandpa. Kids are like that. They don't see the cracks. They see the smiles. So when his birthday came around and he asked, "Can Grandpa come?" I said yes. Some part of me still wanted to believe there was something human left in Douglas. I even agreed to have the party at his house. Neutral ground, I told myself. A chance to show them I'd changed. Ethan helped me make cupcakes. Wrote his name in crooked little letters on the thank you cards. "I want them to know I love them," he said. That one sentence broke me. Because deep down, I wanted that too. I wanted it to be enough. I just didn't realize how wrong I was, until the box of coal hit the floor. The photo shook me. Not because it was dramatic or mysterious, it wasn't some cryptic letter or scandalous revelation. It was just quiet. A moment frozen in time. But in that still frame, everything I thought I knew about myself cracked open. There was my mother, Ruth, lying in a hospital bed, younger than I'd ever seen her. Her hair pulled back, her smile tired but soft. In her arms, a newborn. Me. But it was the man beside her that changed everything. He wasn't Douglas. His features were gentler. His body language, protective. One arm was around my mother's shoulder, the other resting on her hand. There was love in his eyes, not the kind that performs for a camera, but the real kind. The kind that says, "I see you, and you matter to me." And then there was the handwriting. On the back of the photo, in my mother's unmistakable script. Alira, born from love. Always remember that. Alira. No one had called me that in decades. It was my full name, a name my mother used sometimes when she tucked me in or whispered encouragements under her breath. But it had never appeared on school forms or legal documents. Only Ruth had used it. Softly. Carefully. As if protecting something sacred. I stared at the photo, my hands trembling. "What is this?" I whispered. Douglas didn't flinch. He crossed his arms over his chest and said, like he was commenting on the weather, "Your mother had her secrets. Figured it was time you saw one of them." My heart was racing. "You're saying that man? He's not you?" He didn't answer directly. Just shrugged. Brenna gave a nervous laugh. "Okay, what is this, some kind of joke?" Douglas looked straight at me and said, flatly, "You were never mine." I didn't breathe. For a long moment, the air went still. No one spoke. No one moved. The truth settled like ash. You were never mine. So that was it. That was the answer to the years of cold shoulders, impossible expectations, and silence that spoke louder than screams. It wasn't because I'd disappointed him. It was because I had existed. He didn't hate me for what I'd done. He hated me for being born. I turned the photo over again, clinging to my mother's words. Born from love. And then, something in me clicked. Not in the way I expected. I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I clarified. All the years I spent blaming myself, wondering why I was never enough, for his love, his attention, his pride, suddenly seemed irrelevant. I was never supposed to be enough. I was never meant to belong. And that meant I didn't have to keep trying. Ethan was still sitting on the floor, quiet now, hugging his knees. The box of coal had been pushed aside, the contents spilled and forgotten. But he hadn't moved. He was holding his breath the way children do when they're trying not to cry in front of grown-ups. I knelt beside him. His hands were still stained with black dust. I took them gently in mine and wiped them clean with the edge of my sleeve. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said softly. "You are not what they say." His voice shook. "But why did he give me coal?" I felt my throat tighten. "Because he's wrong," I whispered. "And we're done letting wrong people tell us who we are." Then I stood up, turned to Douglas, and faced him fully for the first time in years. "I may not be your daughter by blood," I said, my voice clear, "but I was a child in your house. And you chose cruelty, again and again. You don't get to hurt my son because you never learned how to love me. He didn't respond. Just stared. Still. Cold. I picked up Ethan, grabbed our coats, and walked to the door. And just before I left, I turned back and said, "That man in the photo. He may not be here now, but he loved me. And I will never let my son grow up wondering if he's loved." The front door was in sight. My hand was on the knob. Ethan's arms were wrapped around my neck, his face buried into my shoulder. I should have kept walking. But I didn't. Something in me, clarity, not anger, made me turn back one last time. The room had fallen quiet. Douglas stood like a statue. Brenna perched on the couch's edge, chewing the inside of her cheek like she couldn't process what just happened. I held up the photo. "You want to know the difference between the man in this picture and you?" I asked. Douglas didn't answer. "This man," I said, "showed love in a single moment. He didn't have to shout. He didn't have to control or punish. He just held her hand and smiled. And that one picture says more about who I am than anything you ever gave me." Still, nothing. So I kept going. I used to lie awake wondering why I was never enough. Why no matter what I did, I couldn't break through whatever wall you built around yourself. But now I see it wasn't me. I was never broken. You were. And instead of healing, you passed your pain to everyone around you. I looked down at Ethan. He was watching. Really watching. And I realized something. He wasn't just learning what family isn't. He was learning what it looks like to stand up for yourself. "You gave my son Cole," I said. "On his birthday. Because somewhere in your twisted logic, that's what you think discipline looks like. But what you call discipline, I call emotional abuse. And it ends here." I placed the photo gently on the coffee table. Not for them. But for me. Because it deserved better than to be forgotten. Brenna finally found her voice. "This is insane," she said. "You're blowing everything out of proportion. You don't even know who that man is." "I don't care who he was," I said. "I don't care if he disappeared the day I was born. In one photo, he showed more humanity than I've ever seen in this house." I turned to her. "And you laughed when your nephew was humiliated. Like it was funny. Like it was normal. You may think you're above all this, Brenna. But you're just another branch on a dying tree." Her mouth dropped open. No comeback this time. I looked back at the room. One final sweep. "You want to talk about who's useless?" I said. "Try living your life with a heart made of stone and calling it strength. I may have fallen. I may have failed. But I never stopped feeling. And that's why I'll never be like you." With that, I opened the door. The cold air hit us like a reset button. And as I stepped outside, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt free. We didn't say a word on the drive home. Ethan sat in the back seat, arms crossed, his birthday crown lopsided, the corners of his mouth smeared with blue frosting from a cupcake I'd saved in my bag, the one thing from the party I knew wouldn't break his heart. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other gripping his small palm, offered over the seat like an anchor. The silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Sometimes, silence is where the healing starts. When we got home, our tiny apartment with chip paint and crooked blinds, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed on the couch. Ethan climbed beside me and curled under my arm. "Was he telling the truth?" he asked quietly. "About the coal?" I kissed the top of his head. "No," I said. "Not even close." He nodded. Didn't ask anything else. That night, he fell asleep in my bed. His body tucked into mine, his breath warm against my neck. And I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to find the words for what I was feeling. But there weren't words. Just this aching, beautiful, terrifying realization. We were free. No more apologies. No more family events where love was used like a weapon. No more swallowing my voice so someone else could keep their comfort. I wasn't going to let them hurt my son the way they'd hurt me. Not ever again. I stopped answering texts. There weren't many, just Brenna sending condescending messages masked as concern and Douglas forwarding a single sentence, "You overreacted." Delete. Delete. I didn't need to explain myself to people who had built their whole lives around pretending nothing was ever wrong. Instead, I focused on Ethan. We made a fort in the living room out of bed sheets and couch cushions. Ate pancakes for dinner 3 nights in a row. I let him fall asleep in my lap while watching cartoons I normally said no to. It wasn't some Instagram-worthy version of healing. It was quiet. Gentle. Hours. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was failing. A week after the party, I framed the photo. The one of my mother holding me in the hospital, that unnamed man's arm around her shoulder, their hands interlocked. I didn't try to find out who he was. It didn't matter. All I needed to know was in that frame. That love existed. That I was wanted. It wasn't some dramatic, DNA test on daytime TV moment. There were no cameras, no courtroom revelations. Just a truth that had waited quietly in a box for decades. And now that I had it, I wasn't letting go. I placed the photo on the shelf above Ethan's bed. Right next to the nightlight and the stuffed elephant he refused to sleep without. He noticed it the next evening as I tucked him in. "Is that my other grandpa?" he asked. I smiled. "I think so." "What's his name?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know he loved me. And that love helped me love you better." Ethan looked at the photo for a long time. Then he said, "Then I love him too." And that was enough. I started therapy. Not the polite, once-a-month kind. The real kind. The kind where you show up even when you don't want to. Where you say things out loud that make your voice shake. Where you finally look at the parts of yourself you were told to hide. The kind where healing doesn't feel pretty. It feels like grief. My therapist, Camille, was calm but sharp. She didn't let me dodge the hard questions. "What did you want from your father that you never got?" she asked one session. "Anything," I said. A smile. A hug. A single moment where I wasn't a disappointment. "Did you ever get it?" "No." "Did he ever ask who you were?" I shook my head. "No. He told me who I wasn't. Over and over." She nodded, jotting something in her notebook. "And what about Brayna?" "That was trickier." "Brayna was a mirror," I said. "One that always showed me the worst version of myself." Camille tilted her head. "Or maybe a mirror that showed you her insecurities, and taught you to believe they were yours." That session broke something open. For years, I'd let Brayna's words live rent-free in my mind. Too dramatic. Too weak. Too much. But I wasn't too much. They were just too limited to hold space for someone who felt deeply. 6 weeks after the birthday, I picked up Ethan from school and he said, "Miss Lorna says I'm really good at drawing." I smiled. "You are." She said, "I see the world in color." "You do," I said. "You always have." He pulled a crumpled paper from his backpack and handed it to me. A drawing. It was of me, standing with a cape, glasses, and a heart on my chest. He'd labeled it, "My mom, the brave girl." I stared at it for a long time. Not because it surprised me. But because it reminded me that this was the legacy I was building. Not bitterness. Not silence. Not shame. But bravery. Compassion. Softness that refused to break. One night, as I was brushing Ethan's hair before bed, he asked, "Are you happy now?" It stopped me. Not because I didn't have an answer. But because I hadn't realized he'd been watching me that closely. Kids always are. I thought for a moment, then said, "I'm getting there." He smiled and leaned into me. "Me too." And that was the moment I knew, we didn't need to fix the family we came from. We just needed to build the one we wanted. 6 months passed. Spring gave way to summer. The air was warmer, the lights stayed longer, and everything started to feel softer, inside and out. I didn't return any calls. Not from Brayna. Not from Douglas. Not even from the well-meaning relatives who said things like, "But he's still your father," or "Family is family." Because I had learned something, family isn't about DNA. It's not about blood. It's not about who shares your last name or who shows up in old photos. It's about who shows up for you when it matters. It's about who makes you feel safe when the world is anything but. And for Ethan and me, it was just us. But that was enough. I kept the photo. The one from the envelope. The man I would never meet, the man I now believe to be my biological father, was still a mystery. I didn't know his name. I didn't know his story. But I knew how he looked at my mother. And I knew she looked at him the same way. That one snapshot told me more about love than any memory I had of Douglas. I framed it in simple wood. No glass. No fancy border. It sat right above Ethan's bed, next to the drawings he taped to the wall, superheroes with capes and big hearts, moms with golden hair and open arms. We didn't need a perfect story. We just needed a truthful one. Ethan flourished. He started telling everyone at school he wanted to be a protector when he grew up. Not a superhero. Not a cop. Not a soldier. A protector, he said, like my mom. He drew comics where I had a shield made of kindness and armor made of words. He made up stories where we rescued lost animals and built tree houses that reached the clouds. And one night, after a particularly long bedtime story about a magical lion with a soft drawer, he asked, "Are you ever scared, Mommy?" I paused. "Sometimes." He snuggled closer. "But you're never scared when it's about me." I smiled. "You're right." And I wasn't. For Ethan, I was unshakable. And for the first time in my life, I started to believe it. I found a new job. Something stable. Something that allowed me to be home more often. I stopped working late-night shifts at the gas station. I started writing again. Small things, essays, short stories, blog posts. One of those pieces, "The Day My Son Got Coal," went viral. It was raw and honest and didn't hold anything back. I didn't name names. I didn't drag anyone. I just told the truth. The messages poured in. People who had grown up in cold homes. People who had been the black sheep. Single mothers who had felt invisible. Sons and daughters who had given up on ever hearing "I'm proud of you." They thanked me. And for the first time, I felt like my voice mattered. Like maybe sharing my pain could help someone else name theirs. One day, while cleaning out a drawer, I found a card Ethan had made months earlier. One of the little thank you notes he had written for his birthday. It hadn't been given out that day. It read, "Thank you for coming to my party. I love you. Ethan." There was no name on the front. I didn't know who it was meant for. Maybe it was for Douglas. Maybe Brenna. Or maybe it was for someone he was still hoping would show up. I sat with it for a long time. And then, I put it in a box with a photo. Not because I was holding on to the pain. But because it reminded me that Ethan had come from hope. And I wasn't going to let the world take that from him. A year after that awful birthday, we had a new tradition. We didn't throw a party with guests and streamers and force small talk. We had Adventure Day. Ethan got to pick one thing, anything, and we did it together. That first year, he chose hiking to a waterfall 2 hours away. I packed sandwiches, he packed crayons. We climbed, laughed, and screamed into the trees. When we reached the top, he said, "This is what birthdays are supposed to feel like." The next year, we made art at a local studio. The year after that, we built a bookshelf and painted it blue. We didn't need cake and candles. We needed memories that felt like freedom. I still got questions sometimes. From coworkers, from acquaintances, from strangers who had read my article. "But do you ever miss your family?" My answer? No. I miss the idea of family. But I don't miss people who never really saw me. That usually quieted them. Because the truth is, once you stop needing love from the people who refuse to give it, you realize how much of your life you've spent chasing ghosts. And ghosts don't hug you back. Ethan was 10 when he first asked if he could call that man in the photo something. "Can I call him Grandpa Love?" he asked. I smiled. "Of course you can." From that day on, he did. He'd point to the frame and say, "That's Grandpa Love. He helped Mommy become brave." And in a way, he was right. Love, real, quiet, unwavering love, had found its way to us. Not in the way we expected. But in the way we needed. It skipped a generation, maybe. But it lived. So, if you're reading this, and something about my story feels familiar, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not broken. You are not what they said when they thought you weren't listening. You are not the black sheep, or the burden, or the mistake. You are light. You are the legacy they never saw coming. And you don't owe anyone your silence just to keep their peace. You get to build your own kind of family. You get to choose what love looks like. You get to begin again.